Two twin sisters, Grace and Hope, both homeless, saw a billionaire toss an expensive crib in the trash. As they approached it, their entire bodies shook. Night fell over Chicago like a dark cloak, bringing with it a cutting November wind, the infamous hawk that made dried leaves swirl through the empty alleys. In one of those alleys, wedged between a Chinese restaurant named Golden Dragon and a laundromat called Spin Cycle Laundry, two identical pairs of eyes watched the shadows with a caution no 5-year-old child should ever have to know. Grace and Hope huddled together beneath a makeshift cardboard shelter, their brown hair uncut for months, framing faces that even under the grime of the streets still held an angelic innocence. They wore clothes far too large, a final memory from the shelter they had left behind when rumors of separating siblings started circulating. Sarah Emma whispered, her voice trembling in the cold, "Do you think they'll find us here?" Hope's voice, a near-identical echo of the original fear, trembled in the cold. Grace, born 7 minutes before her sister, gripped her hand tighter. "No, Emma, I promise they won't. We're invisible here, just like the stray cats the lady from the bodega feeds." Both of them remembered the bodega lady well, Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner market, one of the few people who would sometimes offer them leftover food when nobody was looking. She always said her street cats were invisible to the right people and visible only to those who needed to see them. Grace clung to that idea. Being invisible meant being safe. The smell of food coming from the restaurant's back door tormented their empty stomachs, but they had learned to ignore hunger. It was a skill no child should ever have to develop, much like the heightened instinct that made them hide at the slightest sign of danger. A metallic noise startled Hope, who buried her face in her sister's shoulder. Grace kept her eyes fixed on the entrance of the alley, her small fingers clutching the only treasure they owned, a crumpled photograph of their parents, taken in what felt like another lifetime. "It's just a cat," Grace whispered, recognizing the familiar sound of paws on empty cans. "See, just like the cats at the bodega ladies." Hope relaxed a bit but stayed close to her sister. The two had developed their own survival system over the past few weeks. By day, they stayed near busy areas where Grace, with her natural resourcefulness, sometimes managed to get a few coins from hurried pedestrians. Hope, shy, always stayed a step behind, her eyes alert for any sign of threat. At night, they sought out the darkest corners of the city, places where ill-intentioned adults wouldn't think to look. Grace had learned that the hard way when a man who smelled of alcohol tried to grab them near a subway station. Sarah Emma murmured again, her voice carrying a question already asked hundreds of times, "Do you think Mom and Dad are looking for us?" Grace's heart tightened. She knew the truth, or part of it. She remembered the accident, the screams, the sirens. She remembered the hospital and the whispered conversations of adults who believed they were too young to understand. But Hope had blocked out most of those memories, and Grace didn't have the heart to bring them back. "Of course they are," she replied, repeating the lie she told every night. "They'll always be looking for us." A stronger gust of wind blew through the alley, causing the girls to huddle closer together. Grace pulled another piece of cardboard closer, trying to form a barrier against the icy air. Her toes, covered only by torn socks inside worn-out sneakers, were already numb. "Tell me a story," Hope asked, her eyes heavy with sleep. Grace took a deep breath, digging into her memory for the stories their mother used to tell. "Once upon a time there were two princesses," she began, softly yet firmly, so alike that not even the sun could tell them apart. The church clock nearby chimed 9 times, its sound echoing through the empty alleys. In a few hours, the streets would be even quieter, and the cold would grow harsher. Those were the moments when Grace missed most the warmth of a bed, the comfort of a clean blanket, and the sound of her parents breathing in the next room. Hope had already fallen asleep, her steady breathing creating small clouds of vapor in the chilly air. Grace adjusted the old coat over her sister, making sure she was as protected as possible. Her own arms trembled, but she had learned to ignore her discomfort for Hope's sake. A different sound caught her attention, the soft click of high heels on asphalt. It was an unusual noise at that hour, in that place, and Grace instantly grew alert. Through a small gap in their makeshift shelter, she saw an elegant figure hastily pass by the alley's entrance. Something in the way the woman moved drew her attention. It was stealthy, almost predatory, as though she wanted to remain invisible as well. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Her instinct, the same one that had kept them alive, told her something important was about to happen. The woman disappeared as quickly as she had appeared, but she left behind a sense of unease that Grace couldn't explain. The late hours of the night dragged on as Grace fought off sleep, knowing at least one of them needed to remain vigilant. Around midnight, the Chinese restaurant finally closed, leaving the alley even darker. Grace shifted her position, trying to find some small comfort on her cardboard bed. When the first rays of sunlight began painting the sky a pale blue, Grace finally allowed her eyes to close. In a few hours, they'd have to start another day, fighting to survive, but for now, she could rest a bit. Rest. Hope was still in a deep sleep, her soft breathing the only sound Grace wanted to hear. The next day would bring its own challenges and battles, but in that moment, between night and dawn, two small warriors rested in their makeshift shelter, protected by the cloak of invisibility they had learned to wear like armor. And somewhere beyond the horizon of the city that never sleeps, fate was preparing a surprise that would change their lives forever. The night fog spread through Chicago's alleys like a ghostly veil, dancing under the yellow glow of the streetlights. The distinct sound of Christian Louboutin heels against the asphalt cut through the silence, a precise, measured rhythm echoing between building walls like a somber metronome announcing something inevitable. The woman who produced that sound moved with the studied grace of someone accustomed to the most refined social circles. Her black Carolina Herrera dress, fresh off the latest collection which few could afford, slid like liquid silk under her impeccable Burberry coat. The discreet Cartier jewelry on her neck and wrists, tasteful enough not to attract unwanted attention, but costly enough to feed a family for months, occasionally glittered under the dim light. In her arms, protected by fine Italian fabric, was a Fendi portable crib. Her movements, though elegant, carried an undercurrent of urgency, as though each second were meticulously timed in a grim choreography she had rehearsed in her mind hundreds of times. Grace, still awake in her makeshift cardboard shelter, observed the scene with a mix of fascination and apprehension. The scent of Clive Christian No. One, the world's most expensive perfume, though Grace didn't know that, floated toward her, as out of place in that alley as the woman who wore it. It was an aroma that seemed to shout wealth and privilege, in stark contrast to the usual stench of rotten food and trash. The elegant stranger paused for a moment, her eyes hidden behind Tom Ford sunglasses, as she methodically scanned every inch of the surrounding. Instinctively, Grace shrank back into the shadows, pulling Hope, who slept soundly, closer. Years later, Grace would remember this moment as the instant her world began to change irreversibly, though she was unaware of it at the time. With a surgeon's precision, the woman began placing the crib on the ground. Her hands, encased in custom-made Italian leather gloves, adjusted its position with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Each movement was practiced as though she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror countless times. Each gesture was calculated to appear natural in case anyone was watching. A stronger November gust ruffled the woman's coat like black wings. The fabric covering the crib shifted slightly, and Grace caught a glimpse of something moving inside. Her heart pounded with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. For a brief moment, so fast it could have been her imagination, the woman's hands trembled. It was the only flaw in her otherwise flawless performance, a flicker of humanity slipping through the cracks of her mask of indifference. Then, as though flipping an internal switch, her posture stiffened again, and any trace of emotion vanished from her face, perfectly made up with La Mer products. Grace held her breath as the woman turned her head in her direction. Seconds stretched like hours while the darkly tinted glasses swept over the place where the twins were hiding. But the lessons in invisibility they had learned on the streets proved their worth. The woman's gaze passed over them without stopping, as if they were just more shadows among many. With one final glance around the alley, the woman spun on her heel and began walking away, her once measured and precise steps now carrying a barely concealed urgency, as though she were fleeing not just the location, but her own actions. The sound of her heels against the asphalt gradually faded, swallowed by the distant cacophony of the city that never sleeps. Grace waited. 1 minute passed. 2. 5. The only sounds were Hope's soft breathing beside her and the occasional scurrying of rats among the trash bins. Once she was absolutely sure the woman would not return, Grace gently shook her sister awake. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely a breath in the night. "Emma, wake up." Hope opened her eyes slowly, still clouded with sleep. "Sarah, what is it?" "There's something over there." Grace pointed toward the crib, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to see what it is." Hope, still groggy but always trusting her sister's judgment, clung to Grace's hand as they crawled out of their makeshift shelter. The cold night air hit them with renewed force, making their teeth chatter and their bodies shake beneath their thin, worn-out clothes. They crept toward the crib with the stealth of stray cats, each step calculated, each movement silent. As usual, Grace led the way, her small body instinctively positioning itself to protect Hope. Both hearts pounded so loudly it felt like their fear echoed through the empty alley. Reaching close enough, Grace extended a trembling hand and delicately lifted the fabric covering the crib. The soft sound of breathing made them freeze. There, wrapped in blankets that likely cost more than anything the girls had ever owned in their short lives, was a baby. Its eyes were closed in deep sleep, and its rosy cheeks stood out against the night's pallor. It was so small, so fragile, that for a moment the girls stood paralyzed, afraid any movement might hurt it. "It's a baby," Hope whispered, her eyes wide with surprise and concern. "Sarah, he looks so tiny." Grace felt something stir within her, a protective instinct even stronger than what she felt for Hope. The baby couldn't be more than a few months old, left there on a night promising to get even colder. Her young mind struggled to understand how anyone could abandon such a defenseless creature. Hope moved closer to the crib, her eyes locked on the little sleeping face. "We can't leave him here," she said with surprising conviction for a 5-year-old. "He'll freeze to death." Grace looked into her twins' eyes and saw the same realization she felt. They, who knew so well the bitter taste of abandonment, couldn't be complicit in another. The baby stirred slightly in its sleep, tiny hands waving in the air as if searching for something or someone. Hope was already lifting the baby from the crib, surprisingly gentle for someone so young. "He's so light, Sarah and Wormleton. Take him to our shelter," Grace decided, grabbing the blankets from the crib. "At least until morning, then we'll figure out what to do." The twins returned to their corner, now with a new companion. With efficient teamwork born of necessity, they arranged the luxurious blankets into an improvised bed, placing the baby between them to keep him warm. The child never woke during all the commotion, as if instinctively knowing he was in safe hands. Sarah Emma whispered after a while, her fingers gently stroking the baby's soft hair. "Do you think his mom will come back?" Grace thought of the elegant woman, her precise movements, her calculated coldness. She remembered that fleeting tremor in the woman's hands and how quickly she had fled. "No," Grace replied with a certainty beyond her years, "but we'll take care of him." The two of them drew closer to the baby, forming a protective barrier against the cold and the dangers of the night. The little one sighed in his sleep, unconsciously snuggling against the warmth of his new guardians. Hope began to hum a lullaby their mother used to sing, a memory so distant it felt like it belonged to another life. Grace joined in, their childish voices blending into a melody that carried comfort and a touch of sadness. The church clock chimed midnight, its bells echoing through the sleeping city. In a dark Chicago alley, 3 abandoned children found each other, united by fate and the need to survive. Dawn would bring new challenges, but for now, in this moment suspended between yesterday and tomorrow, they had something money could never buy. They had each other. Grace looked up at the sky through a gap between buildings. The stars, usually invisible in Chicago, seemed brighter that night. Maybe it was just her imagination, or perhaps it was a sign that sometimes hope can be found in the most unlikely places. "Go to sleep, Emma," she whispered, noticing her sister fighting drowsiness. "I'll keep watch." Hope nodded sleepily, her small hand still resting protectively on the baby. "Sarah," she murmured almost asleep, "do you think we're a family now?" Grace felt tears burn behind her eyes, but held them back. "Yes, Emma, now we're a family." The early morning hours dragged on as Grace kept silent vigil. The cold intensified as the night wore on, but the luxurious blankets from the crib provided a warmth they rarely experienced sleeping on the street. Grace watched the baby slumber, amazed by the peace in his round little face, seemingly unaware of the drama surrounding him. She registered and evaluated every sound of the city, the creak of a distant door, the meow of a cat, the occasional car passing on the main avenue. The baby occasionally shifted in his sleep, making small noises that made Grace's heart clench with a tenderness she didn't know she possessed. As the night progressed, Grace began planning the next day. They would need milk for the baby, diapers, warmer clothes. Her knowledge of caring for an infant was limited, but her determination was limitless. Somehow they would find a way. The abandoned crib remained where the woman had left it, its elegant silhouette looking strangely forlorn under the weak street lights. Grace wondered how many stories that object could tell, stories of love, loss, and impossible decisions made in desperate moments. When the first rays of sunlight began tinting the sky pink, Grace finally let her eyes close. In a few hours, they would face a new day and all the challenges it brought. But for now, in this quiet moment between night and dawn, she could rest, knowing her tiny makeshift family was safe. Fate, in its infinite wisdom or irony, had brought together 3 lost souls on that cold November night. And as the city began to awaken, no one could imagine how that unlikely union would forever change not only their lives, but also the life of a desperate father who, somewhere in Chicago, had no idea his world was about to be turned upside down. The baby stirred lightly between the twins, his tiny hand grasping Hope's finger with that surprising strength only babies possess, as if even in his sleep he knew he had found protection, not in the arms of someone rich and powerful, but in the loving embrace of 2 little street warriors who, despite their own struggle for survival, still had room in their hearts for one more. The first light of day was barely illuminating the Chicago alleys when Grace made her decision. The baby had cried all night, probably from hunger, and not even the sweetest lullabies could soothe him. Hope, exhausted from a sleepless night, looked at her sister with worried eyes. "We can't go on like this," Grace whispered, adjusting the little one in her arms. "He needs milk-clean diapers. We need to find help." Hope bit her lip nervously. Their last experience at a shelter hadn't been good. Rumors about separating siblings had made them run away in the middle of the night. But now the situation was different. It wasn't just the 2 of them anymore. "What if we try that place the bodega lady mentioned?" Hope suggested, recalling the conversation they'd had with the kind store owner a few days prior. "The Hope Shelter, she said they keep families together there." Grace considered the suggestion. Mrs. Rodriguez had always been good to them, offering leftover food and sometimes a little change. If she recommended the place, maybe it was safe. "All right," she decided, standing carefully so as not to disturb the baby, who had finally fallen asleep. but at the first sign they're going to separate us, we run again." Hope nodded, gathering the few possessions they owned, including the luxurious blankets that came with the baby. The contrast between the fine fabric and their threadbare clothes was stark, but they knew they had to keep the infant warm on the way. The Haven House shelter was located a few blocks away. The girls walked slowly, taking turns carrying the baby and keeping a constant eye on their surroundings. The city was waking up, and a few early morning passers-by cast curious glances at the unusual trio. When they finally reached the red brick building with a discreet sign reading Haven House, the girls paused, hesitant. Grace cradled the baby in her arms, while Hope squeezed her free hand. "Together?" Hope asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Always together," Grace replied, and with that silent promise, they climbed the entrance steps. Elizabeth Liz Hayes was sorting through some paperwork when she heard the doorbell ring. Through the security cameras, she saw something that made her stand up immediately. Two little girls, obviously twins, one of them holding a baby, wrapped in blankets that appeared extremely expensive. "Good morning," she said softly upon opening the door, noticing at once how the girls took a step back, instinctively protective. "I'm Linda. Would you like to come in? It looks like this little one could use a bottle." The twins exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations only twins seem capable of having. It was Grace who finally spoke. "The lady at the bodega said you don't separate families here. Is that true?" Liz felt her heart ache at the fear behind that question. "Yes, it's true. We keep families together. You can stay together, I promise." Something about Liz's calm, sincere manner must have convinced the girls, because they finally stepped inside. The contrast between the shelter's warm environment and the street was striking, and Liz noted how the girls' eyes scanned every detail of the place. "You must be hungry," Liz commented, guiding them to the kitchen. "How about some hot chocolate while we get a bottle ready for the baby?" The mention of hot chocolate made Hope's eyes sparkle, but she still looked to Grace for approval before accepting. Liz watched their dynamic with professional interest. It was clear that Grace took the role of protector. While Nurse Maria prepared the bottle, Liz managed to get the girls seated at the kitchen table, each with a steaming mug of hot chocolate and some cookies. The baby, now in Maria's experienced arms, sucked eagerly at the bottle. "Sarah and Emma Wright?" Liz asked after they shared their names. "Can you tell me how you found the baby?" Grace hesitated, glancing at the infant. "It was last night a woman she left him in the alley where we sleep." Liz kept her expression neutral, though her heart ached at how casually Grace mentioned sleeping in an alley. "Can you describe this woman?" "She was fancy," Hope interrupted, speaking for the first time. "Wore expensive clothes and shoes that clicked on the ground." "And perfume," Grace added, "a perfume unlike anything we'd ever smelled." Liz took mental notes as she listened. The story grew more intriguing, but her priority now was to ensure the children's immediate well-being. "Well, you did the right thing bringing the baby here," she assured them. "Now how about a warm bath and clean clothes? We have a room prepared for the three of you to stay together." The hot bath was a revelation for the girls. Grace and Hope marveled at the warm water and scented soap, small luxuries that had become foreign to them in their life on the street. Liz provided soft, clean pajamas for them, and by the time she showed them the prepared room, the fatigue of the previous night was setting in. The room had 2 single beds and a crib by the wall. A small lamp projected stars on the ceiling, creating a welcoming atmosphere. The baby, now clean and fed, slept soundly in the crib. "If you need anything during the night, just press this button," Liz pointed to an intercom near the door. "I'll be in the next room." As soon as Liz left, the girls pushed the beds closer together, a habit developed on the street that would be hard to break. Grace reached out to hold Hope's hand, as she always did before sleeping. Sarah Emma whispered in the darkness, "Do you think we did the right thing?" Grace looked at the crib where the baby slept peacefully, then at her sister. "Yes, Emma, I think we did." In her office, Liz began typing up her preliminary report. The story had many concerning elements. 2 5-year-olds living on the streets, a baby abandoned by someone clearly wealthy, the girl's fear of being separated. She knew the investigations would start soon, but for now, her priority was making sure these 3 new arrivals felt safe and cared for. When night finally fell over the city, 3 children slept soundly in warm beds for the first time in a long while. And though the mystery of the abandoned baby still needed to be solved, at that moment, at the Haven House, the only thing that mattered was that they were safe, together, and protected. Detective Isabella "Izzy" Diaz parked her squad car at the entrance of the alley where, according to the preliminary report, a baby had been abandoned the previous night. The morning sun barely reached between the tall buildings, leaving the place in a gloom that made it feel even more desolate. The Hope Shelter's report came in about an hour ago, her partner, Detective Mark Johnson, said as he unfolded his long legs from the car. "Linda Carter is known for her thorough work. If she says there's something suspicious about this case, we should take it seriously." Izzy straightened her blazer and grabbed her file. 15 years in the Crimes Against Children unit had taught her that the first moments of an investigation were crucial. The twins mentioned a classy woman designer clothes, expensive perfume, not our usual abandonment profile. The alley looked just like the girls had left it. The Fendi crib still rested against the wall, incongruous among the filth and poverty. Mark approached, putting on latex gloves before examining it. "This isn't just the expensive Alex, it's exclusive," he whistled quietly, flipping over a tag. "Limited edition from what I can tell, probably only a dozen of these in all of Manhattan." Izzy jotted notes in her pad as she surveyed the scene. "We need security footage. The Chinese restaurant has a camera at its back entrance, and the laundromat should have 1 hour too." "Already in the works," Mark replied, photographing the crib from multiple angles. "The tech's on the way to collect it, but there's something more interesting." He pointed to a small imprint on the ground. "High heel, and from the depth, I'd say it's a luton." Izzy stepped closer to examine it. Her partner had a knack for identifying shoe prints, thanks to a daughter obsessed with designer footwear. So our witnesses were right. A rich, well-dressed woman leaving a baby in an alley. Something's definitely off. A stir at the alley's entrance caught her attention. The owner of the Chinese restaurant, Mr. Chen, waved discreetly. "Detectives," he called quietly, "maybe I can help my camera. It covers part of this angle." The investigators followed Mr. Chen into his establishment. In a small back room, a monitor displayed grainy but still useful footage of the alley. "It happened around 11, at night," Mr. Chen informed them, operating the controls with familiarity. "I was closing the kitchen when I noticed movement on the cameras." The recording showed exactly what the twins described, an elegant figure moving with studied precision, placing the crib down, then leaving in a hurry. The image quality wasn't good enough to identify a face, but the posture and movements were telling. "This woman is used to being seen," Izzy commented. "Look how she moves, always aware of her appearance. This wasn't impulsive, it was planned." Mark jotted notes quickly. "I'll request traffic cam footage from a 10-block radius. If she has that profile, she probably arrived by car, an expensive one." "And the girls?" Mr. Chen asked, worry clear in his voice. "I used to see them sometimes taking leftovers. They're so young." "They're safe now," Izzy assured him, "at the Hope Shelter with the baby." Leaving the restaurant, the detectives continued their investigation of the alley. Mark gathered physical evidence, a strand of hair here, a piece of fabric there, while Izzy interviewed other local shop owners. The laundromat owner, Mrs. O'Malley, added her own insight. "It was a very strong, expensive perfume. You know the kind you smell. Even after the person's gone, my daughter works at a luxury department store. She'd recognize it." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming an intriguing picture. A wealthy woman, a well-cared-for baby, a meticulously staged abandonment. This wasn't a typical case of poverty or desperation. There was something deeper going on. "We need a list of all Fendi cribs sold in the last few months," Izzy said as they headed back to the car. "And also check records of missing infants. Somebody has to be looking for this child." Mark nodded, his expression pensive. "Don't you think it's odd that we haven't received any missing child reports matching this baby? Her baby from a wealthy family disappears and no one reports it." "Exactly," Izzy agreed, a worried crease forming between her eyebrows. "Which means either no one has discovered the disappearance yet, or someone is trying to keep it a secret," Mark finished. Back at the station, the pair began organizing the evidence. A large board showcased pictures of the alley, the exclusive crib, security camera stills, and witness descriptions. "The twins are our best witnesses," Izzy noted, studying the board. "We need to interview them formally, but with care, Linda Carter mentioned, they're extremely protective of each other and of the baby." "Speaking of the baby," Mark interjected, hanging up his phone, "I just got the medical report from the Hope Shelter. He's a boy about 6 months old, well-nourished, all vaccines up to date. The clothes he was wearing are all high-end brands, some still with tags." Izzy added these details to the board. "A well-cared-for baby from a wealthy family abandoned in an alley. None of this makes sense. Unless," Mark hesitated, mind clearly working on a theory. "What if it's not a simple abandonment? What if there's a more complicated family dispute?" Izzy considered the possibility. She'd seen cases where children became pawns in power struggles among the rich. "We need to broaden our search, check recent social events, society columns, anything that could give us a clue about wealthy families with infants." The day wore on as the detectives followed different leads. Traffic cameras began revealing a pattern, a brand-new black Mercedes-Benz circling the area shortly before the abandonment. Department stores confirmed recent purchases of Fendi cribs, though transactions were made in cash, making them harder to trace. "There's something big here, Alex," Mark said as he sorted the preliminary reports. "Something someone is trying really hard to hide." Izzy agreed silently. Her years of experience told her they were only scratching the surface of something much larger. Somewhere in Chicago, someone was keeping a secret, and she had a feeling it wouldn't be long before that secret surfaced. The sun was setting when she made her final note of the day. Check possible connections with influential families, potential family conflict. Baby is well cared for, suggesting an emotional bond prior to the abandonment. Elegant woman, possible stepmother, or close relative. The sun cast golden and purple tones across Chicago skyscrapers as the taxi pulled up in front of the imposing Miller residence on the Gold Coast. David straightened his navy blue tie, Ethan's favorite, which the baby always tried to grab, as he paid the driver. The conference in Dallas had been a professional success, but every minute away from his son felt like a small eternity. The doorman, George, seemed briefly surprised to see him, something David would later recall as the first sign something was wrong. For now, his mind was focused solely on seeing his son, inhaling that soft baby scent, and hearing the laughter that filled the house with joy. The residence was disturbingly quiet when he opened the door. There was no familiar sound of Ethan's musical toys, no gentle murmur of Victoria singing to him as she usually did at this hour. The air felt heavy, laden with an indefinable tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "Emily," he called out, leaving his Louis Vuitton briefcase in the foyer. "Jack Daddy's home." Only the echo of his own voice responded, bouncing off the walls of the 3-story home. An unease began to build in his chest as he ascended the stairs toward his son's room, his footsteps on the hardwood floor sounding strangely loud in the oppressive silence. The door to Ethan's room was ajar, a thin beam of corridor light slicing into the dim interior. David pushed the door open gently, expecting to see his little one peacefully asleep in his crib. What he found made his heart stop. The Restoration Hardware crib, chosen so carefully during pregnancy, was empty. Not just empty, but meticulously arranged, the fret linens perfectly smoothed, as though no one had slept there for days. The toys that usually cluttered the Persian rug with cheerful chaos were neatly lined up on the shelves with almost obsessive precision. "Emily!" he roared, his voice echoing through the house, now charged with urgency and fear. "Emily!" He quickly checked the other rooms on that floor, the master bedroom, the walk-in closet, the bathroom, his breathing growing more rapid with each empty space discovered. That was when he heard keys at the front door. He raced back down the stairs, nearly stumbling on the final steps. Victoria entered calmly, carrying a few Neiman Marcus shopping bags, as though it were just another day, as though David's world weren't collapsing around him. "Michael?" She seemed genuinely surprised, her brown eyes widening slightly. "I wasn't expecting you today." "Where's Jack?" The question emerged as a low growl, his hands trembling at his sides. Something changed in Victoria's expression, a barely perceptible flicker of some emotion David couldn't place. Fear? Guilt? She set the bags down with a studied slowness that only increased his anxiety. "Michael, her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard before continuing. Something happened. Blood turned to ice in his veins, and David felt as though the floor were dropping out from beneath him. "Emily!" His voice came out strangled. "Where is my son?" He's gone," she whispered, each syllable stabbing his heart. "What do you mean, gone?" David took a step forward, his mind refusing to process what he was hearing. Victoria looked away, her long, elegant fingers nervously playing with the strap of her Hermes purse. Even in this moment of crisis, she maintained a composure that now felt unsettlingly out of place. "It's been a few days," she answered, her voice disturbingly controlled. The world seemed to stop. David felt a buzzing in his ears, and his vision darkened around the edges. "A few days?" he exploded, making Victoria recoil. "My son's been missing for days and you didn't tell me." "I didn't want to worry you during the conference," she responded, still maintaining that eerie composure. "I thought I could handle it." "Handle it?" David interrupted, his voice shaking with fury and disbelief. "He's not a problem at the gallery, Emily. He's my son, our son. Did you at least call the police?" Victoria's silence was answer enough. David felt a wave of nausea as he grabbed the car keys from the side table, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "Get in the car," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." The drive to the 18th precinct was filled with suffocating silence. David drove his Mercedes with an intensity that whitened his knuckles on the steering wheel, while Victoria stared out the window, apparently absorbed by the city lights at night. Occasionally he glanced at her from the corner of his eye, trying to understand how she could appear so controlled. The station was relatively calm when they arrived, the night shift taking over. The desk sergeant, a middle-aged man with gray hair, directed them immediately to the missing persons unit when David mentioned a child. Detective Isabella "Izzy" Diaz was organizing her desk for the end of her shift when they entered her office. 15 years working on disappearances had taught her to read people, and something about this couple's dynamic immediately drew her attention. The man radiated a frantic energy of barely contained desperation, while the woman, there was something about her composure that felt too rehearsed. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she began after introductions, indicating the chairs in front of her desk. "Please tell me exactly what happened." David ran his hands through his hair in frustration, messing up his usually impeccable style. "I was in Chicago at an important conference. I got back today and found out my 6-month-old son has been missing for days, and my wife," he shot a withered look at Victoria, "didn't think it was important to let me know or call the police." Izzy picked up her notepad, her sharp eyes noticing every reaction. "Mrs. Thompson, why didn't you report the disappearance immediately?" "I panicked," Victoria answered, her voice finally trembling. "I thought he might be somewhere in the house. I searched everywhere, over and over. I turned every room upside down." "Tell me exactly what happened on the day he disappeared," Izzy gently but firmly interrupted. Victoria straightened in her chair, her fingers unconsciously smoothing her Chanel skirt. "It was evening. I'd just given Jack his bath and put him in the crib. The phone rang. It was from the gallery where I work about an important exhibition. I went to my office to take the call crew, where the reception is better when I came back." Her voice failed, and she pulled a silk handkerchief from her bag, though her eyes remained dry. "How long were you on the phone?" 15, maybe 20 minutes at most." "Were all the doors and windows locked?" "Yes, we're always very careful with security." Izzy made detailed notes, watching how Victoria chose each word with measured care, as though recounting a well-rehearsed story. David, who had been observing the interrogation with growing anguish and anger, leaned forward. "How could someone get in and out with a baby unnoticed? We have security cameras, alarms a doorman on duty, 24/7. "We'll need the footage from those cameras," Izzy inserted, taking more notes. "Also recent photos of Jack, a detailed description of what he was wearing, any detail that might help identify him." Victoria withdrew a photo from her purse with a quickness that suggested she'd been expecting the request. "Here's a recent picture. He was wearing a navy blue Ralph Lauren onesie and a white sweater with a small gold pin, a gift from my mother." Izzy maintained a neutral expression with difficulty, but her pulse quickened at the description. It matched perfectly, down to the smallest detail, the clothes of the baby found in the alley. Her suspicions solidified. "I'll assign a team to investigate your house immediately," she said, grabbing her phone. "We also need your phone records from that night and access to all neighborhood camera footage. Mr. Thompson, can you provide the necessary authorizations?" While David filled out forms with shaking hands, Izzy discreetly messaged her partner. "Thompson case possible link to alley baby clothes match timeline lines up need you ASAP." "Do." Mark's response came almost instantly. "On my way." The elegant woman the twins described, Izzy observed Victoria discreetly while they waited for her partner. The impeccable Chanel suit, the costly haircut, the aristocratic posture, all aligned perfectly with the description given by the young witnesses. The night turned into a frenzy of procedures. A forensic team was dispatched to the Miller's home, led by seasoned technician Rodriguez. Separate statements were taken from David and Victoria, revealing minor inconsistencies that Izzy noted mentally. Photos were distributed, alerts were issued, and a preliminary timeline went up on the investigation board. Mark arrived while Victoria was undergoing her third round of questioning, this time by a behavioral analysis specialist. He and Izzy observed through the one-way mirror. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. "Her body language is very controlled," Mark replied, years of experience evident in his analysis. "She's trying too hard to appear worried." "And that phone call story, which conveniently took her to the farthest room from the baby's nursery," Izzy finished. "James, what if it wasn't a kidnapping? What if it was internal?" "Her reaction to the delayed discovery is peculiar," Mark agreed. "And now we have the alley baby connection. We need to investigate her carefully. If she suspects we're on to her, she might make it even harder for us to find the truth," Izzy concluded, watching as Victoria answered questions with that practiced calm that now seemed increasingly suspicious. When David and Victoria finally left the station, it was past 2 in the morning. The Chicago sky was overcast, threatening rain, as though nature itself reflected the grim mood of the situation. David went straight to Ethan's room upon arriving home, unable to face his wife or the rest of the empty house. He sat in the nursing chair, a gift from his late mother, holding Ethan's favorite teddy bear, allowing the tears he'd suppressed all night to finally flow. Downstairs, Victoria remained seated in her Italian leather armchair, nervously twisting a silk handkerchief in her hands as her mind spun with thoughts she dared not share. The weight of her secrets threatened to suffocate her, but it was too late to turn back. Or was it? At the precinct, Izzy and Mark kept working. The investigation room was now covered in photos, documents, and timelines. The whiteboard was divided into sections: Alley Baby, Thompson case, connections, suspects. "The timeline is a perfect match," Mark said, marking points on a timeline. The elegant woman the twins described showed up in the alley the same night Emily says Jack disappeared. "And there's more," Izzy added, pinning another photo to the board. "Look at the clothes, the gold pin. Those details are too specific to be a coincidence." "We need the Thompson residence security footage," Mark said, making notes. "And a full background check on the couple. How long have they been married? How did Michael meet Emily? What's their story?" "I've already requested the records," Izzy replied, rubbing her tired eyes. "But something else is bothering me. Why wait so long to report the disappearance, and why that specific alley for the abandonment if it really was her?" Mark pondered. "We need solid proof before confronting her one misstep, and we could jeopardize the entire investigation." The night wore on as the detectives worked, aware that somewhere in the city a desperate father wept for his son, while 3 children slept in a shelter, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Dawn found David still in the nursing chair, his red-rimmed eyes fixed on the horizon, silently vowing not to rest until he found his son. His hands still clutched the teddy bear, now damp with his tears. Downstairs, Victoria remained unmoving in her armchair, like a marble statue in her expensive dress. The echo of the old clock ticking off the hours reverberated through the empty house, each tick a reminder of precious time slipping away. In her mind, memories and guilt merged like a silent storm. At the station, Izzy and Mark were finalizing their preliminary reports. The investigation board was now filled with potential connections, each red line linking clues that told a story needing proof. "We should keep discreet surveillance on the house," Izzy said, putting away her notes. "Emily Thompson is our main suspect, but we need solid evidence." "And Michael?" Mark asked, glancing at the photo of the devastated father. "He seems completely unaware of his wife's possible involvement." "For now, that's better," Izzy answered. "If he confronts Emily too soon, we could lose our chance to uncover the whole truth." The city woke to another day, unaware of the tragedy unfolding behind the elegant windows of the Gold Coast. Somewhere between the shadows of lies and the light of truth, a baby waited to be found, protected by 2 little guardians fate had placed in his path. The investigation was only beginning, and as Izzy knew well, the deepest secrets often surface when people start making mistakes under pressure. It was only a matter of time before the perfectly constructed facade began to show its first cracks. The day promised to be long, but for David Miller it would be just the first of many in his relentless search for answers. For Victoria, it would be another day weighed down by choices now threatening to destroy everything she had built. And for the detectives, it was the start of an investigation likely to reveal that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those who are supposed to protect us. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Miller mansion, followed by David's anguished shout. "How could you wait so long? How?" Victoria watched the shards of what had once been a Lalique vase scatter across the office floor, her face a mask of composure beginning to crack. A week had passed since the investigation started, and the pressure was finally causing David to break down. "I've explained 1,000 times," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I panicked I wasn't thinking straight." "Not thinking straight?" David laughed bitterly, running his hands through his now perpetually disheveled hair. "For days, Emily days, our son was missing, and you went on with your life going to the gallery shopping." "That's not fair," Victoria protested, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "I searched for him everywhere." "The detectives found something interesting today," David continued, ignoring her defense. "Footage from the hallway camera near Jack's room. Apparently there was a technical glitch right on the night he disappeared. Convenient, huh?" Victoria felt her blood run cold, but maintained her composure. Those cameras have always had issues, you know that. No, Emily, I don't know anything anymore. David took a step toward her. I don't know who you are. I don't know if I ever did. The phone rang, momentarily cutting the tension. It was Detective Diaz again. The calls were becoming more frequent, the questions more specific, more pointed. We need you both at the station. Izzy's voice sounded professional, but there was an underlying urgency. We've discovered something in the building's footage. The drive to the station was filled with suffocating silence. Victoria stared out the window, her mind replaying every detail of that night. She'd been careful, meticulous. She couldn't have made mistakes. In the interrogation room, Detective Diaz waited with her partner, Detective Johnson. On the table between them lay a closed folder that seemed to weigh a ton. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Izzy began, her voice calm, yet firm. We analyzed the street camera recordings. We found something interesting. Interesting? Mark slid some photographs across the metal table. They showed a black Mercedes-Benz identical to Victoria's, circling the neighborhood the night of the disappearance. Is this your car, Mrs. Thompson? Victoria felt her throat go dry. There are dozens of black Mercedes in Manhattan. With that same license plate, Mark challenged, pushing another photo clearly showing the number. David grabbed the picture, his eyes wide with disbelief. You told me you didn't leave the house that night. Victoria began, but the words died in her throat. We also found this, Izzy continued, revealing another photo. In it, a stylish figure carrying something in her arms entered an alley. The image was grainy, but the silhouette was unmistakable. 2 little girls who lived on the street saw something that night, Mark added, studying Victoria's reactions. They described a sophisticated woman wearing designer clothes and expensive heels. David stood abruptly, his chair crashing to the floor. Emily, what did you do? Victoria's face had gone pale, but she still maintained that rigid posture, the control that now seemed more like a prison than a strength. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice finally breaking. No one understands. Then make me understand, David shouted. Where is my son? Our son, Victoria automatically corrected, and something in her tone made everyone in the room freeze. Mrs. Thompson, Izzy intervened gently, I think it's time you told us the whole truth. Victoria looked out the interrogation room window at the city beyond. So many secrets, so many lies carefully constructed over the years. Now, like a house of cards, everything threatened to collapse. You'd never understand, she finally said, turning to David. How it hurts to see another woman in his eyes, your first wife staring back at me through our son. Jack is my son, David emphasized each word, and you abandoned him? How could you? Abandoned? Victoria let out a humorless laugh. I freed him from me, from my insecurities, from my sick jealousy. The confession hit the room like a bomb. David staggered as if struck, and the detectives exchanged significant glances. Mrs. Thompson, Izzy said firmly, I need you to tell us exactly where you left the baby. But before Victoria could respond, Mark burst into the room with new information. Detective Santos, we need you both at the Hope Shelter immediately. The mystery was about to take on new dimensions as long-buried truths rose from the shadows of the past. Somewhere in the city, a baby waited for the resolution of a drama that was only just beginning to unfold. Detective Isabella Izzy Diaz arranged the evidence in the investigation room with meticulous precision. On the whiteboard, the red lines connecting clues finally began to make sense. Footage from the neighboring building's cameras had captured something crucial. Victoria Miller leaving the building carrying a bundle in her arms, covered by a thin cloth, at precisely 11:47 p.m. on the night of the disappearance. We've got her, Mark said, entering the room with more reports. The Mercedes' GPS confirms the route to the alley, and the elevator cameras show her coming back upstairs without the baby 40 minutes later. Izzy nodded, sticking another photo on the board. And the DNA test positive the baby at the Hope Shelter is definitely Jack Thompson. The confirmation they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. It was time for the final confrontation. The interrogation room was quiet when Victoria Miller entered, escorted by 2 officers. Her impeccable Chanel ensemble contrasted starkly with the deep circles under her eyes, the only visible signs of her internal turmoil. "Mrs. Thompson," Izzy began, laying out photos on the metal table. "We just received the lab results. The DNA confirms the baby found in the alley is Jack Thompson." Victoria showed no surprise. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed lightly on the table. "We also have the security camera footage, the GPS logs from your car, and the testimony of the twins who found the baby," Mark added. "There's no more denying it." "I never planned to deny it," Victoria replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I just hoped for more time." "More time for what?" Izzy asked. "To make Michael understand." Victoria finally let her mask of composure drop. "You don't know what it's like seeing the ghost of another woman in his eyes, his first wife, mocking me through him." "CLA?" Mark asked, checking his notes. "Michael's first wife." "The perfect, beloved CLA," Victoria said bitterly. "Even dead, she had more influence over Jack than I ever would." The door opened abruptly. David Miller entered, his face etched with fury and pain. "How could you?" His voice trembled. "He's just a baby, Emily, an innocent baby." "Innocent?" Victoria laughed without humor. "He was a constant reminder that I would never be enough, that no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be the mother CLA would have been." David reeled as if slapped. "So you abandoned him in an alley he could have died." "I chose that alley specifically," Victoria said, her voice disturbingly calm. "I knew there were people living there. I watched for days the twins, and they were so protective of each other, I knew they'd take care of him." Izzy and Mark exchanged glances. The level of premeditation was terrifying. "Mrs. Thompson," Izzy intervened, "you're confessing to deliberately abandoning a 6-month-old child, correct?" "I'm confessing to freeing all of us," Victoria responded. "Michael could find someone who could love Jack as he deserved, and I could finally stop competing with a ghost." The prosecutor, watching through the one-way mirror, was already preparing charges: child abandonment, negligence, endangerment. The legal consequences would be severe. The first hearing was scheduled for the following week. The courtroom was packed when Victoria Miller, now stripped of her expensive jewelry and designer clothes, faced the judge. David sat across from her, the twins, Grace and Hope, by his side, Ethan safe in his arms. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "we have here a case of premeditated abandonment. Mrs. Thompson not only meticulously planned her actions, but attempted to cover up the crime for days, causing undue anguish to the child and his family." Victoria's lawyer tried to argue psychological issues, a late onset of postpartum depression, but the evidence of planning was too strong. The judge listened intently to all testimony, paying special attention to the twins, who described how they found and protected the baby. The sentence was pronounced with the gravity the case deserved. Victoria Miller received 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3, plus mandatory psychological treatment. David, who had already filed for divorce, was granted full custody of Ethan. But the day's surprise came when he stood up to make an announcement. "Your Honor, I'd like to place on record my desire to adopt Sarah and Emma Johnson. These extraordinary girls saved my son. They deserve a home, a family." The twins, who had dreamed so long of a place to call their own, couldn't hold back their tears. Ethan, in David's arms, smiled as if understanding that his family was finally complete. Victoria watched the scene with mixed emotions on her face. Perhaps for the first time, she realized the true extent of what she had done and lost. As she was led out of the courtroom, Victoria cast one last look at the family that might have been hers. David held Ethan with one arm and hugged the twins with the other, an image of unconditional love she had never understood. Detective Diaz observed from the gallery, satisfied to see justice served. It wasn't a traditionally happy ending, but it was a just one. The wounds would take time to heal, but a new family had been born out of the ashes of tragedy. For Ethan, Grace, and Hope, a new life was beginning. For David, it was a chance to create something beautiful from the pain. And for Victoria, it would be a long road of reflection and perhaps redemption. Justice had been served, but as Izzy well knew, the real work of healing was just starting. In her experience, sometimes the greatest tragedies could lead to the most beautiful new beginnings, and the new Miller family was living proof of that. "Alexandra, you need to see this." Mark rushed into the investigation room, carrying a folder full of documents. It was late, and both detectives were still working on the Miller case, reviewing every detail meticulously. "What did you find?" Izzy looked up from the photos she was studying, images of the baby abandoned at the Haven house. "Remember the old pin the twins mentioned, the one the baby was wearing when they found him?" Mark spread out some pictures on the table. "Look at this." The images showed Victoria Miller at various social events. In each photo, one detail stood out: a small, delicate gold pin shaped like a rose, an antique piece. "It's a family heirloom," Mark explained. "It belonged to her mother, and guess what? It's identical to the one the abandoned baby wore." Izzy felt her heart skip a beat. This was the connection they'd been seeking. "We need the Hope Shelter pictures now." Minutes later, the images lay side by side, the pin on the baby's clothes at the shelter and the same pin worn by Victoria on different occasions. There was no doubt they were the same. "There's more," Mark went on. "I analyzed the recordings from the neighborhood security cameras. The black Mercedes that shows up in the alley that night, the license plate matches Emily Thompson's car." Izzy started linking the clues on the whiteboard, drawing red lines to connect them. "The timeline matches perfectly Jack's disappearance. The alley drop-off the designer clothes, the pin, and the twins' description," Mark added. "A sophisticated woman, expensive perfume, high heels, it all fits Emily's profile." "We have to talk to Michael Thompson," Izzy decided, picking up her phone, "but carefully if Emily realizes we're connecting the cases." The call to David was brief and discreet. 30 minutes later, he entered the station, exhaustion evident on his face. "Mr. Thompson," Izzy began gently, "we've discovered some connections we need to discuss with you." David sat down, passing his hands over his face in a gesture of despair. "What connections?" Izzy presented the evidence methodically. Each photo, each document, each detail explained carefully. She watched as David's expression changed from confusion to shock, and then to a horrified understanding. "The pin," he murmured, taking one of the photos with trembling hands. "Emily always said it was her most precious piece of jewelry, a gift from her mother before she died." "Miss Thompson," Mark interjected gently, "we need you to tell us about Emily's relationship with Jack. Were there signs of tension?" David remained silent for a long moment, as though sifting through memories with a new perspective. She always seemed distant from him. At first I thought it was insecurity about being a stepmother, but now... "Now?" Izzy prompted. "Small things start to make sense," David continued, his voice choked with emotion. "How she avoided being alone with him, how tense she got when he cried, and especially," he hesitated, "especially how she reacted whenever people mentioned Jack looked like CLA, my first wife." David closed his eyes, pain evident on his face. "God, how did I not see this before?" Izzy exchanged a significant glance with Mark. Now was the time to press a bit more. "Mr. Thompson, we need your help to build this case. Emily must not suspect we know about the connection yet." David nodded slowly, determination glimmering in his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" The detectives laid out their plan. David was to keep his routine normal, but pay special attention to Victoria's behavior. Any comment about the abandoned baby, any suspicious reaction, was to be reported immediately. "We've installed court-authorized audio surveillance in the residence," Mark explained, showing the legal documents. "Every conversation will be recorded. We need a solid case." Meanwhile, at the Haven house, Liz Hayes received an important call. "The twins will need to testify," Izzy explained on the phone, "but we'll protect them as much as possible. They're key witnesses." The following days were an exercise in patience and strategy. David, now aware of the horrifying truth, had to play the role of a concerned husband while closely watching Victoria's every move. And Victoria? Victoria began showing signs of pressure. Her hands trembled slightly at breakfast. Her eyes constantly flicked to the phone. Tiny cracks appeared in her perfectly crafted facade. During a particularly tense dinner, David casually mentioned a news report about the abandoned baby. Victoria's reaction was subtle but revealing. A dropped fork, a sudden intake of breath, a quick flash of panic in her eyes. "Terrible, isn't it?" David commented, observing her carefully. "Leaving a child like that." "Sometimes," Victoria replied after a long pause, "people do desperate things for reasons others wouldn't understand." The phrase was immediately transmitted to the investigation center, where Izzy and Mark were listening. "We've got her," Izzy muttered. "That's practically a confession." The investigation was now entering its final stage. Each piece of the puzzle was falling into place: the pin, the car, the clothes, the timing, the witnesses. The pressure on Victoria grew by the hour. One particularly difficult evening, David found her in the office, staring at a photo of Ethan. "Do you want to talk?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage simmering inside him. Victoria turned slowly, and for the first time, David saw her defenses begin to crumble. "There's so much to say," she murmured, "so much you wouldn't understand." "Try," David replied, the recorder in his pocket capturing every word. Victoria opened her mouth but seemed to reconsider. "Tomorrow," she said finally. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow." David immediately informed the detectives. The moment of truth was approaching. Izzy and Mark prepared their team. By the next day, all the pieces would finally come together. The sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows through the windows of the Miller mansion. In her room, Victoria sat before the mirror, the familiar gold pin in her hands. Tomorrow, all her secrets would come to light. Tomorrow, the world would learn what desperation and jealousy could do to a person. And somewhere in the city, in a cozy room at the Haven house, a baby slept peacefully, protected by two little guardians fate had placed in his path. Tomorrow would bring painful revelations, but perhaps it would also mark the beginning of healing for all the wounds born of silence and secrets. The 18th Precinct's interrogation room had never felt so suffocating. Victoria Miller sat up straight in her chair, her hands neatly folded on the cold metal table. The gold pin, now a key piece of evidence, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. David occupied the chair opposite her, his face etched with exhaustion and contained pain. Between them, Detective Isabella "Izzy" Diaz waited, notepad open, ready to record the confession everyone knew was coming. "I was 15, Victoria began, her voice surprisingly firm. "When the doctors told me I'd never be able to have children, a congenital condition, they said as though technical words could lessen the weight of that sentence." David shifted uncomfortably. In all their years of marriage, Victoria had never spoken so frankly about this. "My mother gave me this pin that day," she continued, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the jewelry. "Said it was a symbol of female strength passed down for generations, that I could still be a mother, even if not biologically. At the time it felt like an empty consolation." Izzy took discreet notes, letting Victoria guide her own narrative. "When I met Michael, I thought I'd finally found someone who would accept me a widower with a baby. It seemed perfect. I could be a mother without having to face the pain of not being able to conceive." Her voice wavered. But that's not how it happened. What changed? Izzy asked gently. Everything changed the first time I held Jack, Victoria replied, tears finally forming in her eyes. He opened those eyes so much like Claire's and smiled, and in that moment I knew I would never truly be his mother. David closed his eyes, pain etched on his face. Emily, no. Michael, you need to hear this, she cut him off. Every time someone said Jack looked like CLA, it was like a knife in my heart. Every photo of her in the house, every story about her, every time you unconsciously cared how I cared for him to how she would have. I never did that, David protested. You didn't have to. It was in everyone's eyes at family gatherings, social events, even that baby music class. You know what the instructor told me one day? CLA loved singing to him when she was still pregnant. He must have inherited his love of music from her. The heavy silence that followed carried decades of unspoken pain. The pressure kept building, Victoria continued after a moment. Every smile I had to force, every time I had to explain why we didn't have more children, every sympathetic look when I mentioned I was just the stepmother. So you decided to abandon him? Izzy finished softly. It wasn't sudden, Victoria admitted. I watched that alley for weeks, saw the twins, how they cared for each other. I thought he'd be better off with someone who could love him without reservations, without the baggage of inadequacy and jealousy. You could have talked to me, David said, voice choked. We could have gotten help therapy. Therapy wouldn't give me a functional womb, Michael, Victoria responded bitterly. It wouldn't erase CLA from everyone's memory, wouldn't make Jack truly my son. Izzy observed the interaction with professional attentiveness, noting each emotional layer that had led to this point. That night, Victoria continued, when I pinned the brooch on his sweater, it was like my mother was watching me. The symbol of female strength became the marker of my biggest weakness. The twins mentioned the pin, Izzy said. It's what led us to you. Victoria nodded. Ironic, isn't it? The object meant to symbolize my strength ended up betraying me. She turned to David. I never wanted to hurt you or Jack. I just wanted to stop feeling so much pain. David stood abruptly and walked to the window. The city carried on outside, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside that room. Jack is safe now, Izzy said. The twins protected him, took care of him. I knew they would, Victoria murmured. There's something about them, a strength I never had. They can love unconditionally, even though they've lost so much. Another silence filled the room, broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Liz Hayes had arrived with the twins for official identification. Through the window, Victoria watched the two little girls, so small, yet so strong, holding hands as always. They're what I should have been, Victoria said quietly. Protectors loving unconditional without letting the past poison the present. David still faced away, his shoulders trembling slightly. Years of memories were being redefined under the light of these revelations. Every moment of distance, every forced smile, every excuse to avoid being alone with Ethan. What happens now? He asked finally, his voice raw with emotion. Now, Izzy answered professionally, we finalize the confession. The prosecutor is already drafting charges, child abandonment negligence. I accept the consequences, Victoria interrupted. I only ask one thing. She hesitated, eyes lingering on the twins through the window. Take care of them too. Michael, they deserve the love I couldn't give. David finally turned, his eyes meeting his wife's for the last time. There was no forgiveness there, not yet, maybe never. But there was understanding, painful understanding of how untreated wounds can destroy not just one life, but many. As Victoria was led out of the room, the gold pin remained on the table, a silent symbol of how expectations, fear, and pain can warp even the most sacred bonds. David looked at the twins in the hallway, noticing for the first time how naturally they filled the void Victoria had never occupied. In their small faces, he saw a wisdom born of adversity, a capacity to love that transcended blood and DNA. The sun began to set over Chicago, its golden light casting long shadows through the precinct windows. Somewhere at the Haven House, Ethan waited, unaware of the day's revelations, safeguarded by the unconditional love of his young guardians. As night fell over the city, new bonds were formed from the ashes of the old, bonds not built on duty or blood, but on something far stronger, the conscious choice to love, despite everything and because of everything. David watched Grace and Hope play with Ethan in the garden of the Haven House. The sound of childish laughter filled the morning air, so different from the oppressive silence that had ruled his home in recent weeks. The twins had developed their own routine with the baby, Grace always sensing his needs before he started crying, Hope entertaining him with songs and stories. Liz Hayes approached, carrying a folder of documents. "They're remarkable, aren't they?" she commented, following David's gaze. "In all my years working with children, I've never seen such love and devotion." "How do they do it?" David asked, his voice thick with emotion. "After all they've been through, being abandoned and hurt, how do they still love so freely?" Liz smiled softly. "Sometimes those who've known the pain of rejection best understand the value of unconditional love." In that moment, a decision crystallized in David's heart. It wasn't a long, drawn-out process, but rather the recognition of something already present, waiting to be acknowledged. "I want to adopt them," he said with conviction. "They saved my son, but more than that, they saved all of us." Liz didn't look surprised. "I already have the initial paperwork," she replied, opening the folder. "I knew you'd come to that conclusion." The adoption process began that very afternoon. David hired the best attorneys, determined to do everything the right way. When the twins were informed of the possibility, they reacted with a mix of hope and caution. Life on the streets had taught them not to trust promises too easily. "You'd have a room all to yourselves," David gently explained, sitting with them in the recreation area. You could stay together, take care of Jagal, we'd be a family." Grace, the protector, squeezed Hope's hand. "Promise you'll never separate us." "I promise," David replied without hesitation. "The three of you will always be together. It's a promise I plan to keep for the rest of my life." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The Miller mansion underwent a transformation. The guest room turned into a cheerful space for the twins, complete with 2 beds side by side, exactly as they wanted. David took them shopping for paint, furniture, and toys, an entirely new experience for girls who had never owned anything of their own. Ethan's crib was moved into the room next door to theirs, a decision that visibly comforted all 3 children. The nights, once silent and tense, were now filled with bedtime stories and lullabies. The adjustment wasn't without challenges. The twins still sometimes woke up scared, worried they'd be back on the streets. Ethan occasionally cried at night, calling for a mother who would never return. But little by little, day by day, a new normal began to take shape. David found himself marveling at daily discoveries. How Grace always knew exactly what Ethan needed before he even started crying. How Hope had a natural talent for making the baby laugh with her silly faces and spontaneous dances. How both girls, despite their youth, showed a maturity and understanding many adults lacked. Sessions with the child psychologist, Dr. Emily Carter, had helped everyone process the changes. "It's important to validate their feelings," she explained to David. "Their fear of abandonment won't vanish overnight, but with consistency and love, it can be overcome." Liz Hayes visited regularly, monitoring the family's progress. Each visit, she noticed little changes. The twins' drawings decorating the walls, photos of the 4 of them together filling the frames, toys scattered around the house in a way that spoke of life and joy. "Daddy," Hope called one afternoon, the word coming naturally, surprising everyone, including herself. David felt his heart stop briefly, then swell with such intense love he could hardly breathe. Grace watched with her ever-observant eyes, still protective of her sister, but when she saw David's genuine smile, she allowed herself to hope for this new reality as well. "Are we really staying forever?" she asked quietly. David knelt in front of them, holding Ethan in his arms. "Not just staying, you're my daughters now, as much as Jack is my son, that will never change." The legal process continued with hearings and evaluations, but within the house, the family was already formed, built not by blood, but by choice, by love, and by a sequence of painful events that in the end led to something beautiful. One night, as he tucked the twins into bed, David found Grace holding the old gold pin that had been central evidence in the case. Liz had managed to have it returned, no longer as proof of a crime, but as a symbol of transformation. "We can give it a new meaning," Grace suggested, her wisdom beyond her years shining in her eyes. "It doesn't have to be about sadness." David took the pin, watching how the moonlight played on its golden surface. "How about a symbol of our new beginning of the family we chose to be?" Hope smiled sleepily. "A real family." "Yes," David replied, placing the pin on the small table between their beds. "The most real family there is." As the twins drifted off to sleep and Ethan dozed peacefully in his crib next door, David reflected on life's twists and turns. From the pain of abandonment, something precious had arisen, a family built on conscious choices, on unconditional love, on the courage to trust again. The future still held challenges, of course. There would be hard days, moments of doubt, painful memories to be processed. But now they would face it all together, a father and 3 children, united not by fate or blood, but by something far stronger. The daily decision to love and protect one another, no matter what. The visiting room at the Women's Recovery Center was quiet that Sunday morning. Victoria, now without her flashy jewelry and designer clothes, waited nervously. 6 months had passed since her sentencing, 6 months of intensive therapy and deep reflection. The door opened and David walked in, carrying Ethan in his arms. To Victoria's surprise, Grace and Hope followed, their small hands intertwined as always. Seeing the 3 children together, so different from the last time she'd seen them in court, made her heart clench. "Hello, Emily," David said gently, taking a seat with Ethan in his lap. The twins took chairs on either side of him, their eyes watchful but not hostile. "You all came," Victoria managed, her voice trembling slightly. "It was the girls' idea," David explained. "They thought it was important." Grace, ever the spokesperson, leaned forward. "Dr. Martinez explained about emotional scars," she said with a wisdom beyond her years. "How they need exposure to air so they can heal." Victoria felt tears well up. Therapy had taught her not to hide her emotions anymore, not to build walls of perfection around her. "I'm so sorry," she began, words she'd rehearsed countless times, finally finding their way out. "I'm sorry for everything, the abandonment, the lies, the pain I caused." Ethan, now almost a year old, looked at her curiously. There was no recognition in his eyes. How could there be? But there was also no fear. "Therapy has helped me understand," Victoria continued. "My trauma of infertility, my obsession with close memory, how it all poisoned me, but none of it was Jack's fault. It never was." David shifted the baby in his arms, his gaze softening slightly. "No, it wasn't, just as it wasn't Claire's fault or mine or yours. Sometimes wounds run so deep we can't see beyond them." Hope, who had been quiet so far, surprised everyone by speaking up. "When we lived on the street, Sarah always said pain couldn't turn us into bad people. We had to be stronger than it." The little girl's words struck Victoria like lightning. These children, who had experienced abandonment and loss so young, still held on to their capacity for understanding and forgiveness. "You two are extraordinary," Victoria said to the twins. "You saved Jack, not just physically, you saved us all in a way." "We're building something new," David explained, "a different family than we imagined, but no less real because of it." Victoria nodded, wiping her tears. "Can I tell you a story?" When everyone agreed, she continued. "When I was little, before I knew I couldn't have children, I dreamed of having a big family. I imagined a house full of laughter, full of love. But when I got the diagnosis, that dream died, or I thought it did." "And now," Grace asked softly, "now I understand that family isn't about being able to give birth or competing with memories," Victoria replied. "It's about love, choice, acceptance. You taught me that." David took something from his briefcase, the old gold pin. "The girls wanted you to know they've given it a new meaning. It's no longer a symbol of loss, but of transformation." Victoria touched the pin with trembling fingers. "How do you do it, have so much wisdom, so much capacity to forgive?" "Because holding on to anger hurts more than forgiving," Hope answered simply. The morning passed with soft conversation and shared stories, small moments of connection. Ethan played with a rattle, occasionally offering smiles that lit up the austere visiting room. The twins told Victoria about their new school, their friends, life with David. When it was time to go, Victoria felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't a traditional happy ending. There were still consequences to face, time to serve, trust to rebuild. But it was a beginning. "Can we come back?" Grace asked David as they stood to leave. "If Emily wants," he replied, looking at his ex-wife with new understanding. "I'd love that," Victoria said gently. "If you'll let me be a part of your lives, even if it's in a different way." "Like a friend," Hope suggested. "Like a friend," Victoria agreed, smiling through her tears. As she watched them leave the visiting room, Victoria felt something shift within her. The walls she had built over the years, the masks of perfection, the constant fear of inadequacy, all began to dissolve, replaced by something real, something hopeful. Dr. Peterson, her therapist at the center, had spoken about transformation, how sometimes we must lose everything to find our true self. Watching Ethan in David's arms, the twins hand in hand, Victoria finally understood. Her story was no longer about loss and envy, but about redemption and growth. The scars would remain, but they now told a different story, not one of destruction, but of reconstruction. The afternoon sun shone through the barred windows, creating patterns of light on the floor. Somewhere in the city, a new family continued its journey of healing and love. And here, in this simple room, a woman began to rewrite her own fate, no longer a prisoner of her wounds, but transformed by them. The garden of the Miller mansion was decorated with colorful balloons and ribbons that danced in the gentle spring breeze. It was Ethan's first birthday, but the celebration meant much more than just another year of life. It was the celebration of a new beginning. Grace and Hope, now officially Grace and Hope Miller, ran around the lawn, helping put the final touches on the party. Their new dresses, chosen especially for the occasion, reflected the transformation in their lives. They were no longer the little street dwellers, but cherished children, secure in their new home. David watched the scene from the porch, his heart overflowing with gratitude. The past year had been a journey of transformation for them all. The scars were still there, but now they told a story of triumph and love, not just pain. "Dad," Hope called, running toward him. "Linda just arrived with the cake." Liz Hayes, who had become more than just the director of a shelter, but an integral part of this rebuilt family, smiled as she carried an elaborate cake decorated with little sugar teddy bears. "I wouldn't miss this celebration," she said, placing the cake on the decorated table. "It's an important milestone for all of us." Guests began to arrive. Detective Isabella "Izzy" Diaz and her partner, Mark Johnson, who had become close friends of the family. Dr. Emily Carter, the therapist who had helped the children process their traumas. And to many people's surprise, Victoria, now on parole after demonstrating excellent progress in her rehabilitation. Victoria's presence was no longer a source of tension, but a testament to how forgiveness and understanding could transform even the deepest wounds. She had found her place in this new family dynamic not as a stepmother, but as a friend who had learned powerful lessons about unconditional love. "Jack has grown so much," she commented softly, watching the toddler who was now taking his first steps, always under his older sister's watchful eyes. "He's starting to talk too," Grace said proudly. "He can say Dada Weir and M." The sound of children's laughter filled the air as they played. Ethan, safe in David's arms, looked on with bright, happy eyes. No trace of the trauma from his abandonment remained, only the love and security provided by his sisters and father. "I never imagined we'd get here," David remarked to Liz as they observed the children. "After everything." "Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as tragedies," Liz replied wisely. "Look at them now. It's as if they were always meant to be a family." The afternoon was filled with games, presents, and countless photographs. In a particularly touching moment, Grace and Hope unveiled their surprise. A song they had secretly rehearsed, the same lullaby they used to sing to Ethan on that very first night in the alley. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden as the girls' voices rose in harmony. Once just a symbol of survival, the lullaby was now a celebration of love and family. "You've changed my life," David told his daughters later, after the guests had left and Ethan slept peacefully in his crib. "You saved not just Jack, but me as well," as the twins cuddled into his arms, a ritual that had become precious for all of them. "You saved us too, Dad," Hope murmured, half asleep. "We a real family now," Grace added. "Forever." David hugged them tighter, reflecting on the mysterious ways of fate. From the tragedy of abandonment arose a stronger, more genuine family than any bond of blood could create. The old gold pin, now framed on the living room wall, glowed under the evening light. No longer a symbol of pain and inadequacy, it was a reminder of how love can transform even the most painful stories into tales of redemption. Before leaving, Victoria had given David an envelope. Inside was a letter expressing her deepest thoughts. "Dear Michael, seeing you two today, so united and happy, finally made me understand what family truly means. It's not about perfection or expectations, but about unconditional love and acceptance. Sarah and Emma taught me more about motherhood in their small acts of love for Jack than all my years of anguish over not being able to conceive. Ever did, I'm grateful to be part of this story, even in a way different from what I once imagined, watching Jack grow surrounded by so much love, seeing the girls blossom in their new home, witnessing you find peace and joy. Again, this is a gift I don't deserve, but I humbly accept. Thank you for allowing me a place in this new family, even after everything your forgiveness has taught me more about love than anything else in life. With affection, Emily." David kept the letter alongside other memories now filling a special album. Pictures of the twins on their first day of school, drawings they made for Ethan, precious moments captured on film that told the story of their unique family. The future stretched out before them like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new memories, adventures, and moments of love and learning. The scars of the past hadn't vanished entirely, but they'd become marks of strength and resilience. Grace and Hope now slept peacefully in their rooms, their dreams no longer haunted by fears of abandonment and loneliness. Ethan, in the next room, rested safely, subconsciously aware he was loved without condition. David did his final nightly walk through the house, a ritual that had become sacred. In each room, evidence of a happy family. Scattered toys, drawings on the walls, smiling photos in every available frame. In the library, he picked up the photo album once more. The first pages showed their difficult beginning, newspaper clippings about the abandonment, photos from the investigation. But as he turned the pages, the transformation became evident. Each picture told a story of healing, of love, of a family being built, choice by choice, day by day. A new destiny had been forged from the ashes of the old. A family had been born, not from blood or duty, but from the purest and truest love, the kind that chooses, forgives, and endures. And as night embraced the city outside, within the Miller mansion, 3 children slept, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. A father rested in peace, knowing his family was complete. And a new chapter prepared to unfold, not one of loss and abandonment, but a saga of love, redemption, and the transformative power of the family we choose to be.